Are you curious about bodies, pleasure, and possibilities? And what about curious about what others are up to on the planet when it comes to pleasure, sex, and play? Have you considered what pleasure can do for your life, your body, and your bank account? Do you know something magical, delightful, and out of this world orgasmic is not only possible for you, but totally available to you? If you're ready to be the magical, sexual, sexy beast you know you can be, and you just need the tools to get there, you're in the right place. Now, here is the host of The Pleasure Zone, sex, relationship, and intimacy coach and holistic health practitioner, Milica Jelenic.
Welcome, my sweet pleasure seekers. Well, I hope you just enjoyed the new intro. Maybe you missed the new intro. Maybe you missed it. But anyway, welcome to the Pleasure Zone, my sweet pleasure seekers. For those of you who are brand spanking new, you may or may not have realized what you've stepped in on. You've stepped in on the Pleasure Zone. And the Pleasure Zone is where we talk about all things pleasurable. Usually the conversation has to do with sex and relationships and looking at sex from all kinds of different perspectives, where sometimes we need to heal certain things like trauma in order to be able to welcome more pleasure into our lives. And today's episode is really about being able to find and navigate how to have and cultivate pleasure in our everyday lives so that we can have pleasure beyond the bedroom and start to find different ways to have it in our everyday life. One of the things I find that when I tell people what I do, they usually either get like super curious, like, oh, you're a sex and intimacy coach. They usually don't get hyper excited about me being a holistic health practitioner, and having the potential to like assist them in changing some health issues. That's like, oh yeah, that's whatever. But the sex and intimacy coaching usually gets people's ears tweaked, and they start to listen and they get curious. And I also have a very opposite response where people kind of back off and they get scared or grossed out or assume that what I do is like prostitution or something, which it's absolutely not. So it's such a wide range. I get that it's a really, a strange title for a lot of people. And there's a lot of images and ideas that pop up with being a sex and intimacy coach. And one of the things is to be able to assist people who also don't necessarily have partners or maybe have never experienced pleasure to find ways to have pleasure in your life. So I do have quite a few people who have said to me, well, it doesn't really matter. I don't have a relationship right now, so I can't use your services. And that's absolutely not true. Sex and intimacy coaching is best to start with you always. And then if you do have a partner, then your partner also to work with you on whatever's coming up. In terms of whatever you'd like to explore, conversations you'd like to have, different things that you are curious about. So when you're looking at cultivating pleasure in your everyday life, this is an invitation for you to be able to have this kind of pleasure, to have pleasure in your life beyond the bedroom and not making the bedroom the focus of your pleasure. And I have lots of shows where we do put a lot of the focus onto sex. And even then, I always say, what are our top priorities, guys? Communication, consent, and curiosity. So all of those things are key. Even, communication, consent, and curiosity are kind of like key ways for me. The way that I see it is key ways to kind of just live your life, whether it's with friends or family. If you have good communication, if you have consent, that means you have good boundaries as well. And curiosity just means you're willing to explore and try new things. So those three C's are great C's. I mean, there's other great C's in the world too, but we're going to talk about the three C's and cultivating those three C's. That's a fourth C today. And how do we do that? So I think one of the fundamental things to look at is how we process pleasure. Like as human beings, how do we process pleasure. And a lot of pleasure is actually processed in our brain, and our brain is part of our nervous system. So we also process pleasure in different parts of like it's a different parts of our brain have. So we have, there's our hypothalamus. It actually helps to release dopamine. And then we also have different parts of the frontal cortex that help with processing pleasure, but also when they do brain scans, when people are experiencing pleasure, find different parts lighting up. And some of those are in the front of the brain. Some of them are kind of more kind of deeply in the bit of the middle of the brain. But instead of like looking at the technicalities of it, just know that it's actually your brain. So when people are like, what you're experiencing is all in your mind is incredibly complex. And your mind has the ability to, hold on to ideas and thoughts. And it's like a massive processing system. It's like your computer, but like I don't even know how many terabytes your brain can hold compared to your computer. I'm sure if somebody measured it, it's astronomical compared to what actual computers do. And we do process things in a different way. We process thoughts, feelings, and emotions, where, as far as we know, our computers don't. So we are processing all kinds of input all the time. And then our body is changing according to that. So when we are experiencing pleasure in our life, whether that's just like eating really good food or having a fun new experience or having an experience that you enjoy, like a repeated experience, uh, maybe you really love petting kittens or something. So every time you pet a kitten, you're like super happy. Well, then your body will light up and dopamine will get released. So whatever it is that's creating dopamine release in your body, that's one of your four happy hormones. So dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins all get released as part of the happiness hormones, which is also very pleasure related. And although, the words, sometimes people use them interchangeably, I do think they're slightly different. Being happy or being experiencing pleasure, I do think they're slightly different, nuanced maybe. And I do think that pleasure is more than sex, or more than at least copulation as well. Because a lot of people will define sex as copulation, and which means body parts going together. It doesn't necessarily include all the other fun play that sex can include. So it's beyond that. And it's actually about how we interact with our environment, with our life, with all the stimuli going on, whether that's, the breeze that we just felt or a smell in a room. It can be so many different things. So our brains are so incredibly complex, and we don't even fully understand brains. There's still neuroscientists out there learning all the time what our brains are doing. For example, that little pause you might have heard or seen, that was my brain processing that my mouth was dry. And so what would help me is having water. And so our brains do this, and some of these things are conscious, some of them are unconscious. And a lot of times, if you can pay attention and be mindful, you're able to see what does create pleasure for you personally, what creates pleasure for others, and does creating pleasure for others create pleasure for you, which is kind of like compersion, which is where you derive pleasure from other people having pleasure. Are you doing things specifically as a people pleaser to make other people happy, but then essentially you're not happy, but you're trying to get your body to turn on those happy hormones, and you're trying so hard to be happy? I hear that from a lot of people. They use the word try a lot, and I'm a real fan of a lot of things sci-fi, and one of the things is Yoda saying, do or do not, there is no try. And I love Yoda for that. So Star Wars reference there for you guys. Although I am a much bigger Trekkie, I apologize to those of you out there who would find that offensive. But so we have our bodies we're constantly finding more information. We, or the scientists, are constantly finding more information about how our brains are operating, what's going on, how we're creating new neural connections, what parts of the brain respond to different stimuli, how our, how different stimuli can create different effects. And there's always learning to be had. We definitely haven't fully mapped the brain, and we definitely don't know everything about everything that's going on in the brain. So I just want to simplify it and say that, because you know what, I could say something today, and then in 5 years from now, when you're listening to this podcast, you might go, oh, wait a second, well, that's not so true anymore. We now know this, this, and this, right? So there are usually additional information that comes out. So we just know that it's processed in the brain. There are chemicals that are released, like dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And who knows, maybe in years to come, they're going to find even more chemicals that we aren't even aware of yet. It's a beautiful thing that we're always constantly learning and growing, as science should constantly learn and grow and bring new information to the table at all times, based on evidence and repeated proof. Anyway, that's a story for another day. All right. So the question of like, what is pleasure? So we can define it simply as something that we experience in our lives. It's kind of a general way of engaging with life to feel good. It's in a mental, emotional, spiritual, physical response um, to life. And a lot of times, I think one of the things to look at is, what is pleasure for you personally? What brings you pleasure personally? And it's not always the same as something that would bring somebody else pleasure. And you can see that really simply by restaurants having a variety of options, because if everybody ate exactly the same food all the time and there was no change, and that we as humans were okay with that, um, which we wouldn't be, because we would be kind of bored and our bodies would suffer from eating exactly the same thing every day all the time. Requires like different things, even different times of the year. Sometimes we need more of one thing or another, depending on levels of stress going on in our lives, and what's being depleted, and all those sorts of things. So we can see a lot of evidence around us of why and how our bodies actually receive pleasure, and why everybody's pleasure is different. And so what brings you pleasure is different than what brings somebody else pleasure. And using that restaurant example as an example, so that you can realize, like, hey, wait a second, the same is true when it comes to sex. The same is true when it comes to clothing and materials and textures and lighting and colors, and so many things that we experience in so many different ways. The vibrations coming off of even colors can be like super different for each person. So if you paint a room and you think it's amazing, somebody else could walk in and just have an awful, like, guttural reaction to it, where they just want to puke or get violent, or because their reaction to that color is very different than your reaction to that color. And I have an example of that. So I had a roommate in second year. She's still a friend of mine, good friend of mine. And I had painted my room in this house that we were sharing, and I thought it was a great color. It was like a bluish green, kind of a deep color. And I had a room that didn't have a lot of light, which I was okay with, because I actually wanted to be able to sleep in a lot of darkness. I've always been somebody who doesn't like to sleep with a lot of light interference. So I had this dark room with this like deep bluish green, kind of gray color walls. And it was the first day I met her. And she walked into the room and went, "That is a horrible color." And I was like, "Wow, that's a really strong reaction. Nice to meet you too." Anyway, we are like some of the best of friends. So Um, it's kind of funny how some of my best of friends we've had violent reactions in the first 5 minutes. But anyway, that is what it is. So that is just, one of those examples where I found that color comforting and she found it quite obtrusive. And the kind of hilarious part was, I had leftover paint and she ended up using it to kind of like graffiti her walls later. So I guess she didn't hate it as much as she thought she did. So one of the things to look at is like, what does bring you pleasure? What in your environment do you like and what don't you like? And Marie Kondo, takes it as what brings you joy. And that's similar kind of energy as pleasure. So what brings you joy? And the things that don't bring you joy, you need to move. And like the way I keep my desk brings me joy. But my other best friend looks at my desk and it mortifies her because it's like she can't handle all the stuff on it. So whatever brings you joy, go for it. If it doesn't bring you joy, don't do it. I like to have things accessible. So I like to have things that I can just touch, very tactile. And that's not true for everyone. And not everybody likes to have things the same way, right? So, what is pleasure for you? What do you like in your environment? How do you like your environment? And, whether that's smells or lighting or different ways you've had things organized or not organized or whatever works for you, you need to know what works for you. So, in our next segment, we're going to look at a few different things to help reframe your mindset to be able to figure out how to get out of the places where you're struggling to feel pleasure and be able to get into that and allow yourself to even be indulgent a little. So, we'll look at that when we come back. You're listening to the Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show, with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for the Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is the Pleasure Zone with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@milicajelienic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. So, in the last segment, we were talking about pleasure and how it's different for everyone, and how some people feel like maybe they don't deserve pleasure or they don't know how to experience it. And I can understand that. There were a lot of times and ways in my life where I haven't experienced pleasure. And there are times in my life where people think that I'm mad, but actually I'm thoroughly enjoying my frustration or thoroughly enjoying my anger or rage. And I've managed to learn to reframe that. So there may have been probably a time in my life where I would get stuck in anger and not know what to do with it. But now I kind of I'm like, oh, there's anger. I'm going to not only lean in, I'm going to love it. I'm going to touch my anger with love. And then I'm going to see what shows up. And in doing that, it usually shifts quite quickly. And at the same time, it makes all the feelings okay. So it's like all your feelings are allowed, but not necessarily all behaviors are acceptable. Like punching somebody because you're angry isn't acceptable, but feeling and experiencing anger is absolutely acceptable. So feelings, and I'm saying this because I've heard quite a few people in the last few weeks be told by others that they that somebody is tired of them being emotional. Stop being so emotional. That saying, stop being so emotional. That's like saying stop living. So even if you're being emotional by being happy, happy is emotion. Anger is emotion. Frustration is emotion. Delight is emotion. Pleasure is emotion. But if you say to somebody, stop being so emotional, well, that's basically telling them that they're not supposed to feel anything. And that's called death. So a big F you to everybody who says that to people. You can go suck the big one and choke on it. Yeah. So have fun with that. And if you are somebody who is actually cool with emotion, then you'll understand that all emotion can also derive you a sense of satisfaction at some point and can help you get awareness and help you to move through different things, whether it is that you're experiencing frustration and you just be with it and then you can enjoy it. The satisfaction that comes out of, say, a task that you're frustrated with, but then you find resolution or a solution. And then the dopamine and the endorphins and the oxytocin, all of that can kick in because you're feeling satisfied by finding a solution, right? So frustration is actually a really excellent thing to experience. And I think when I was a young mom, I kind of struggled with that. Like, no, I wasn't a young mother. I was 33 when I had my child, but when I was a mother of a young child, I personally struggled with allowing my child to struggle. So I want to sometimes step in and show a way or something to, here, try this solution. And it took a while to be able to just let my child be frustrated. And it's like, it's okay to be frustrated. If you don't want to feel frustrated right now, let me know if you want tools and I'll help you through that. But get through that, right? Being able to get through it is really important. It teaches us a bunch of different things. And it also can bring so much pleasure after as well. Being able to find solutions is great. So why am I talking about frustration? I don't know, because I went on a tangent, but for even sexual frustration, when you do get to have a release, can be incredibly satisfying. And frustration, if you're working on like projects and you're not really sure what to do, but you find a solution, so satisfying. Um, and yes, checking off a task, that's such a great example too. So if you are somebody who loves to write down tasks and you get to check them off your list and you're like, oh, I got that done. Yes. And there may be times in your life where you just feel like, you know what? The greatest pleasure I have is in doing absolutely nothing. And I have to say, in the last like 48 hours, I've been like fully feeling like, you know what? I am enjoying nothingness and the fact that, like, if I don't have to talk to anybody today, fantastic. And I don't always go through moods like that, but there are times where I go into full hermit and might last a few hours or a few days or a few weeks. And when I'm in full hermit, I thoroughly enjoy just being in my own thoughts in my own head, even like being on creating this podcast tonight and being live with you guys, for those of you listening live or listening in podcast later. um, like a real moment for me right now is where I'm going, the what I feel is that struggling through my show, and you guys might not hear it, but personally, coming on tonight was like, oh, I would rather hide in my room and just be quiet and have the lights off and meditate. And I chose to come on so that I could be able to get that feeling of satisfaction that I've not only accomplished something, but been able to move through a struggle. And I will go honor myself after and probably just go hide and meditate for an hour before I go to sleep. So sometimes it's stepping up to those challenges of things. It's like, ugh, I don't want to. And then I got to check in and go, is that like my inner brat just going, I don't want to do nothing, never, nobody, I don't care about nobody, nothing at all. And that's what I feel like. And that's like my inner brat comes out and I don't want to do nothing, nowhere. And and so that frustration can be very satisfying to be able to just play that out and not necessarily have it ripple effect and affect like the rest of my family of me being a brat, but I can take my brat energy and I often channel it through things like I'll channel it through puppets or toys and work it out, because that's how one of the ways I process is through play. And believe it or not, a lot of people actually process through play. And it is a way that I derive pleasure in my life, is through processing my emotion through play. Whether it's just like actually like getting toys and playing with like dolls and puppets, or I know probably people are listening going, like, you're a sex and intimacy coach and a holistic health practitioner, and now you're talking about this. That's whack. The truth of it is play is actually one of the top ways to move out of trauma and move out of stress. And children do it fantastically. And for some reason, there's an age where we hit maybe puberty and we think of play as inappropriate, or that's for kids, I'm not going to do that. Or then we switch it up and, you know, people start playing video games, or they'll play adult games instead, so it's acceptable. And we forget that, you know what, you might actually have more fun playing with your Legos or playing with your dolls or going for a bike ride like you did when you were little, or skipping down the street and doing hopscotch. That might bring you pleasure. So one of the fun things that I like to encourage people to do and look at are, what are the things that you did when you were little that brought you pleasure? Because a lot of times the things that we've did when we were little and that we no longer do are the things we're repressing from ourselves that bring us pleasure. So if you were like an avid crafter when you were little, and then somewhere you were told that your crafting was messy and useless or blah, 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 so you stopped crafting, you might have put it away and you might not be crafting anymore. But if you started again, it might bring you not only great pleasure, but you might find that it actually becomes like a source of income. I'm watching a lot of people these days get into crocheting again. I remember being taught how to crochet and knit and needlepoint and sew by my grandparents and my mom. And those things, I know that for my grandmother, knitting and sewing brought her immense pleasure, especially knitting. And it was like her form of therapy. And she would knit and knit and knit and she could knit a pair of socks in like 2 days. She was phenomenal and fast. And she could like do it while watching a show at the same time. And so that was kind of a play thing that she did as a child. It was something she learned how to do when she was little, because she had a heart condition and she wasn't really able to go like run outside with the other kids. It wasn't until she was much older that they actually had a way to help her and do surgery on her so that she could have more of an active life. And she did like to walk, and she probably would have been sporty, but she couldn't get into the sports because of her heart condition. So she was the kid who crafted and knit and sewed and did all the things like that, even though maybe she wanted to do other stuff. And so she just kept on doing that, even until she wasn't able to anymore. So I think for me, it's important to give yourself permission. Number one, give yourself permission to have pleasure in anything, in any way that is consensual to everybody involved, right? So if your pleasure is smacking people in the face and they haven't said yes to that and they didn't consent, then no. That kind of pleasure is non-consensual pleasure. So your pleasure should be consensual to those involved. And if it's making something, or if you're crafting away, if your crafting interferes with your entire life and like your whole house has been taken over by crafting, it might be something to consider selling some stuff, or getting a new home and getting a bigger space for your crafts. There's a way to work it. So that you can still keep doing the things you love to do. Maybe give your crafts away if you can't sell them, but you can always consider selling them. Anyway, that's a side note. And then you might get pleasure from actually getting money for the things you're doing. So let's get back to that fundamental. What are some of the things you loved doing when you were little that you haven't done in ages? Maybe you love playing baseball. Go join a baseball team. If you don't have mobility to do that, then join a team that allows for different abilities, different levels of abilities. If you live far away in a place that doesn't allow that, well, go get yourself a ball and a bat and just hit a ball and a bat somewhere in a park, right? Just go. There are ways to always do it. Because you know why I'm saying that is because I always find people will have excuses to not do what brings them pleasure. Well, I can't, I don't have time. Well, I can't because I can't run. Well, I can't because I have pain. Well, I can't because. And all of those becauses and excuses are actually compounding and creating more. They're becoming like a dam in your body from you experiencing pleasure. So if you're like, well, I love walking, but I can't walk now. Well, if you have mobility in your hands, say you're paraplegic and you're paraplegic, but you have access to your hands and you used to love walking, but you can't. Sometimes getting even therapeutic exercises going where you might be holding on to a rope underneath your foot and lifting your leg to give your leg the action, even while you're sitting in your chair, to give your leg the action of motion will help. And those are a lot of things that are done in rehab with movement that I know, the people I know who do rehab do that kind of work. So to me, there's always a way. It might be different, but there's always a way to have your body feel that same sensation, that memory, that, if you love gardening, but you can't get down on the ground and garden anymore, well, you can have up high planters. You could have potted plants in your house that you can look after. Again, there's always a way. So we're going to come back and look and explore more everyday things you can do to have pleasure. And I'll give you some tips and tools on how to thoroughly enjoy simple things in life. You're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show, with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for The Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is The Pleasure Zone with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@MilicaJelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seeker. And seeker is multiple. I hope there's many of you out there. If you are new to this show and you're enjoying it, I would love for you to, wherever you're listening, click download the shows. But there's so many platforms that we're on, between YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, iHeartRadio. There's actually over 70 places that you can find this show. So wherever you are listening, if there are comments, I'd love for you to comment. It really helps my show. I'd love for you to like it. And by all means, and I hardly ever say this, so, you probably find you're like, I forget to tell people to follow. Please do follow. I totally appreciate as many follows as possible. So one of the things that we're talking about with pleasure is those everyday experiences, those small things that sometimes we think about or we don't realize that we miss like childhood pleasures. Whether, you were little and skipping was great. I loved skipping when I was little. And I loved riding my bike, and I'm so looking forward to riding my bike again. The weather is clearing up here in Ontario, Canada, so I'll be able to get back on my bike. And I loved playing with my dolls, and I still have them. So they're a great source of therapeutic joy for me these days. And there was a while where they weren't so active, but in the last few years, I think especially during COVID, I started to bring them out and just start to feel like a sense of um, no, it was more than pleasure. It was like rekindling my childhood and being okay with being playful again. And I've always been okay with being playful, but this was like kind of extreme. Like they're actually out when other adults are in the house. Got my dolls like sitting on the sofa. Before they were just kind of like my hidden secret in my room, and now they're everywhere and have personalities. And there you go. So, so if you don't like people puppeteering things, don't come to my house. If you do like a good puppeteering show, let me know. I might bring them on the show. Alrighty. So I think I also had mentioned movement, right? Like running or whatever. I was never a big runner. I didn't really enjoy running, but I do like movement. And one of the things I loved doing as a child was dancing. And so I was part of a dance group for 15 years. I was part of a folklore dance group, Serbian folklore. And I loved it. What I loved was the dancing. I didn't love the politics of the people, but I loved the movement, that my body got to be part of the movement and the music and all of that and the energy of the dancing. So every once in a while, I'll get in my car and I will put on some super dance music and rock my heart out to Serbian folklore, because that's the kind of wild gal I am. And sometimes I'll put it on in the house when nobody's around, because the dancing can be quite jumpy, and our house can move. So sometimes I do it outside, sometimes I do it in the house, sometimes I do it in my cabin that I work out of. You never know where you will find me dancing. And you might find that there was movement that you really enjoyed too in your life. And coming back to the movements that you enjoyed, whether it was stretching or swimming, all of that's movement. Just, I remember lots of girls growing up, they loved doing cartwheels. For the life of me, I can't do a cartwheel. I even hired a woman once who was a gymnast, like pretty up there gymnast, to try and teach me. And she's like, "Oh yeah, I've no problem. I know lots of people who say they can't do cartwheels and I could teach them in usually an hour or so." She was with me for 4 hours and she basically surrendered and was like, "Yeah, okay, so there are people who just can't do cartwheels." Yeah, that's me. I'm one of them. And I love when people are like, "Yeah, I've taught I like will hire experts and they will often surrender when it comes to things like handstands, cartwheels, skating. That was another one. I had several friends try to teach me how to skate in my life, and not happening. So sometimes you just got to surrender and realize what you are good at and what does bring you pleasure, maybe some of the things that you want to cultivate and become even better at and have fun with, and then you can enjoy it and you can see progress in it. But if you are doing things that, and I'm bringing these up because every time I would try and go back to try and learn something like skating, and then the next person be like, "No, it's really easy. This is just what you got to do is this and this." Like somebody else would have a new tip or tool and I'd be like, "Okay, I'll try this." And then I would fail. And every time I'd be like, "For the love of God, what's wrong with me?" And that can be a downer. That can actually really put you into a loop of thinking there's something wrong with you, that you're not good enough, you're not smart enough. So you do need wins in the day. It is good to realize what you're not good at. Absolutely. And it's also, failures are good as well. They can help you and teach you how to grow. But it's really important to have wins and to find wins for the day. And every day finding at least one thing that not only you're grateful for, but that you had pleasure in. So gratitude for a pleasurable moment of your day. So if you had, for example, uh, I did something today that I found pleasurable. I think it was my breakfast. I'll have to think about that before I go to bed and meditate. But I will find, and I try my best to find at least one thing that brought me pleasure in the day. And sometimes it's just giving my child a hug. And sometimes it's seeing my husband smile. Sometimes it's being able to look at myself and go, you know what? You're doing it okay there, lady. Like you're doing all right. You made it through another day. And that can bring me pleasure too. It can be so small. And I'm not that hard to please, actually. So, so there you go. I don't know if my husband would say the same, but I think I'm not that hard to please. I'll ask him. I don't think he thinks I'm that hard to please either. Otherwise, he probably would have left. He's not into having to put in excessive amounts of effort. So movement and sound and, dance, all those kinds of things that bring you pleasure. You could be like just on the ground, grinding. Like I've watched a few videos on YouTube where there's like groups of women who are doing like grinding workshops, and they got their hips really going, and yeah, that might bring you lots of pleasure too. Sometimes when my back is feeling stiff, or I feel like my coccyx is tight and the nerves that are coming out of my sacrum are feeling tight, then I will get into a rocking motion. And it's actually a really good way to release trauma as well. So you get on your hands and knees and you kind of just like go back and forth, rocking your body back and forth. It can be incredibly great for alleviating stress and helping your body to self-regulate. So, you often see kids doing rocking. That's a great way to self-regulate. If you happen to have a rocking chair, fantastic. I do have rocking chairs, but they're not in my house anymore. So I need to get another rocking chair back in my house. The rocking chair I do have does not fit my butt anymore because it's from when I was a child and when I was like little. So all the little kids who come to the house get on that thing and rock and roll like there's no tomorrow. So find out what brings you pleasure and do it. Keep it simple for right now, guys. Like, I don't think you have to go outrageous and trying to find like a new big project to accomplish. You need something small every day to start getting those dopamine hits to want to keep you going. And it doesn't have to be the same thing every day, just one thing that motivates you to keep going. And then being absolutely okay with the days where you're not feeling it and be like, you know what, I'm not feeling it today. Not to make it a thing that's going to be, and it might just, I'm not feeling it in this 5 minutes or this like hour. I just haven't felt it this hour to like feel happy, and it's okay. And I'm okay with whatever I'm experiencing right now. It's usually other people who are uncomfortable with you not being fully happy, and they're like, try and make you happy. And it's also one of those things that as a parent, I've had to learn how to be okay if, my kid's like having a mood and be like, yeah, it's cool. You need a mood? Cool. You have a mood. You need to feel sad. You need to feel this? Cool. If you want to talk about it, I'm here. If you don't, that's cool too. That is just whatever you're experiencing is a-okay. Your feelings, all of them, including pleasure, matter, including anger, matter. And they do tend to be kind of on like this, they can often feel like they're on this oppositional spectrum, right? Like anger is like joy is the opposite of anger. And I don't feel like that's true. Like for me, feelings are kind of like just jumbled balls, like they're spheres, kind of like time, and they all kind of coexist simultaneously. And one of them might have more brightness that moment. But as a person who looks at the world more holistically, I feel, and I don't know if I'm right on this, but it's my feeling that all feelings coexist simultaneously, just some of them pop more. So sometimes your pleasure might be popping more than your anger. Sometimes your anger might be popping more. But you have all of those things. You don't just have one. You're not just I'm just a happy person. No, you're not. And it's okay that you're not. If you really truly are only a happy person, there might be some interesting wiring going on in your brain that you don't experience other things like stressors that could create frustration or anxiety or anger or anything like that. And you might have that wiring. I know that does exist, and it's rare, but it does exist. And I also do know that the opposite does exist, where people only experience anger, but they don't experience happiness. So when I'm talking about these feelings coexist, that's kind of a generalization, and it's true for most people, not all people, but most people. So just check in for you and see if, are you okay with having all kinds of feelings, and that some of them are more prominent or predominant at times than others. Maybe they're lighting up more, they're more evident than other feelings, but the feelings are all there. And then how would you like to express them? What would you like to do with them? So I kind of went off on a bit of a tangent, but I think you guys get what I'm talking about. So we're going to come back and we're going to wrap up the show. We're going to head off to the next commercial break. You're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show, with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for the Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is the Pleasure Zone with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@MilicaJelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. And just in case, if you are enjoying the show, if you could please give us a 5-star review on iTunes. Just search The Pleasure Zone with Milica Jelenic. That's MilicaJelenic. I would be so grateful. It really helps in getting the information out to the world, to people who need it. And it's all free information. So every little bit of your input helps. Likes, comments, shares, all of that super helps. So that would bring me great pleasure. Thank you guys for bringing me great pleasure. And I appreciate it. So for getting back onto the topic of like everyday life, everyday pleasures, I think let's take it down to some things that we kind of need to do to survive. We can derive pleasure from things like breathing. We can derive pleasure from things like eating. And I've actually, a friend of mine, her dog derives such immense pleasure from taking a poo. Like I've never seen anything like it. And the last time she was visiting, and he took a poo and he just got he like ran in circles. He went mental. He was like so excited. He was running up and down like the laneway. I have a big property. So he was like running like mad, running in circles. Like he had just won the friggin' lottery. And I looked at that and I was like, wow, that's awesome that he has so much like freaking excitement and happiness from taking a poo. And I thought, like, what would that look like for humans if we all like took a dump and then got up and were like, it's amazing. I feel phenomenal. I'm going to run around and dance and go mental and and everybody's going to know I took a poo because I'm that level. I'm poo level excited. Poo level excited is like a level that most people don't even know exists until they see this particular dog take a poo and go absolutely freaking wild. So cheers to you, Bentley, and your pooping, because man, that is some happy, happy times. So we can get pleasure from any and all of that stuff, but let's take it down to food, because food is so experiential with all of our senses. And I think if you can take this into your life, even like the next time you go eat, and I learned this from another lady who has a show on the Inspired Choices Network. Years ago, I went to a workshop with her. And the workshop was all about really knowing your body. And one of the things we did was food was brought out and we got to experience it with our 5 senses. So touching it and letting the food touch us and licking it. So Danielle Carter is the one who had created this, or that I learned this exercise from. So I don't know if she invented it, but it's a fun one. So pick a food, whatever it happens to be, and experience it with all your senses. Touch it, smell it, like really smell it, smell the nuances of it, feel the heat of it, feel the coolness of it, whatever temperature it is, lick it and notice, like, what is it just lick? When you lick it, what does it feel like in your mouth? And then if you bite it once, what does that feel like? If you let it sit in your mouth and roll around your tongue, what does that feel like? You know, listen to it. Sometimes our food makes noise, right? I think that's why kids really love things like Rice Krispies. It's like the snap, crackle, pop sound. And I didn't get paid to say about that, by the way, but if anybody wants to give me money for that, go right ahead. That would bring me pleasure. So foods do make noises, and sometimes those noises can be super exciting, sometimes scary, like listening to a lobster being boiled. That scared the crap out of me when I was little. So some foods make noises that are scary. Some foods make noises that are exciting and pleasurable, and sometimes they're sloppy and fun sounding. And the look too, like having food that looks good is enticing, right? So fully experiencing your food with all of your pleasure, with all your senses, and deriving pleasure from it. So taking like just a bite and feeling it and smelling it and experiencing it. Mindful eating it's really an interesting experience. You'll probably find that you hardly need any food, and that you feel satiated, and your body starts to feel full, and it becomes efficient in different ways, right? So yeah, it's not that you're necessarily eating a lot, but it's that your body will eat what it requires, and it will eat till it's satisfied and feeling pleasure. So I think that's really important to pay attention to those things, or because our body is always speaking to us. So have fun with your food for sure. And then another one of the things to do is to look at all the different ways in your life. Like, are there different belief systems, or was there, it's like religious or things you were told by your family, like, you got to work hard. Work shouldn't be fun. You're having too much fun. Those things when you've been told that pleasure is wrong or bad, and that life and work need to be incredibly hard and stressful. Um, I think a lot of people who were raised by hardworking moms, hardworking parents in general, got that passed on. And that is a value that sometimes can be traumatizing and create generational trauma, so that we forget that we can have pleasure. And generational trauma is an interesting thing. So let's move out of the generational trauma and start to allow ourselves and shift our mindset to allow ourselves to have pleasure and discover what that is for us. And to me, it really is key to look at what brought us pleasure as children that we are no longer feeling like we're allowed to have. Allowing food to bring us pleasure, allowing sleep to bring us pleasure, and clothing, the fundamental things that we pretty much need to do every day, they can bring us pleasure in so many different ways, and allowing them to do that, and then allowing ourselves to have more of it. Like, it's okay to have pleasure. It's okay to have and be indulgent, like indulge in having your body feel happy, indulge in giving yourself like really beautiful soap, or like really nice tooth. I love really good toothpaste. And so like indulging in certain things that are both great for your body, but they bring you pleasure. So some people like to have the best of the best chocolate, or the best of the best wine, or the best of the best coffees. Yes, like allow your body to have pleasure. I mean, there is a difference between pleasure and addiction, and we won't even get into that because this show's almost over. But I do want to remind you that we all deserve, and I think that's such a word. I just don't, I'm just going to say it because that's what people use. I think shifting your mindset to say, I choose to know and receive pleasure. I choose to know and receive pleasure. I choose to know pleasure. I choose pleasure. And just Put that on repeat in your brain until you actually experience pleasure. I choose to know pleasure. I choose to receive pleasure. I choose to have pleasure in my life. I choose to love pleasure, and I choose to allow pleasure to love me. I choose that. I don't know about you guys, but that's where I'm at.
Thank you for choosing to listen to The Pleasure Zone with sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, Milica Jelenic. We'll return next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. We hope you'll join us. Until then, have the best week of your life by choosing to be turned on and tuned in to your body.